Everyone, can you see and hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Oh, welcome.
Hello, Amir.
Hi,
Yes.
hi. Good
What
to see
time is
everyone.
it there?
Now it's 5:30 p.m. over
Oh,
here.
wait, I can't hear you.
Is it better now?
It's good.
It's good.
No,
Okay.
not yet. It's okay.
Good.
We'll get the technical parts done. But
Okay.
can you hear me?
I
Yeah.
can hear you.
I
Yeah, we can
cannot
hear
hear
you.
you.
We
Yes.
can hear
Great.
Amir and we can hear Rabbi.
Okay. So I'm gonna turn my camera off for just 1 minute. I want to get myself a glass of water next to me, and then we can start. Okay. So
Yes.
1 minute.
Sounds good.
Right.
Okay, so we'll take a couple more minutes to get some of the technical aspects fixed. But it is great to be together, and we'll start the program in just a couple minutes.
Rabbi, I think we could hear Amir when
As
you
we're
said
getting
you
ready,
couldn't.
just a reminder, if
We've been able to hear him.
if everyone at this point could put themselves on mute, and then we'll be able to, Dan Bender will be monitoring chats for when we get to questions later, and be able to help in that way. I'm told that everyone else can hear Amir except me, so that's okay. I'll figure out my side of it then, as long as everyone else can hear you. So, Howard Lesser, put a thumbs up if you can hear Amir.
Hi guys.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect.
can you hear me?
So it's something on my end.
Sorry.
Great.
Okay.
Let me. So, okay, so let me, Amir, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you because I can't hear you. I'll figure it out, but let me get this rolling. I'm so grateful to see you, for you to be here, that the Bethel community, our hearts have been with you and all of Israel over these past 70 plus days. Looking forward to hearing of your experiences and your insights. In a more formal introduction, of course, Amir is the chief Washington correspondent for Haaretz, one of Israel's major newspapers. From 2017 to 2020, he was the newspaper's correspondent in Washington, where he covered everything that was going on here in Washington, Trump and Congress and the Jewish community. He has written extensively in a lot of prestigious publications. The list doesn't need to go on. His Army service in Unit 8200, the Intelligence Corps in the IDF, and of course is a resident at Kibbutz Nahal Oz, which was one of the kibbutzim that was devastated on October 7th. I would say, personally, for us at Bethel, you have also become a beloved teacher in the Skolnick Institute, and so many people have an affinity for you personally, beyond all of the professional accomplishments that you have. At the end, we're also going to ask, Amir has only asked for one thing and is not anything for himself, but that as part of the Nahal Oz rebuilding efforts, we're going to give a link for people that want to make donations to that effort, and more for that. So Amir, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to figure out my side of things. And thank you for being here.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you so much. And the indication that if there's any indication that someone has trouble hearing me, Just, I don't know, wave your hands at the computer or something and I will see it. But if that doesn't happen, I'm just going to continue talking. And I trust Stephanie to be my guide for this kind of stuff. So it's really great to see everyone. A lot of familiar names and faces from my classes over the years with Bethel, with the Skolnik Institute. And we've discussed so many things during these, it's been, I think, almost 3 years now that we've been doing these courses every semester. And I apologize that I was not available for this year's semester. I was actually looking forward to it and already preparing my presentations. And then something happened, as you all heard, and there was a slight change of plans in my life. I'll tell you first of all a little bit about what's happening right now, because I've spoken quite a lot about the events of October 7 and told the story again and again of what happened in my community and specifically with my family. But I want to give you a little bit of an understanding of what is happening today. And I'm happy to also discuss October 7 later, but just to connect you to the current realities. My community, Kibbutz Nahal Oz, the closest community in Israel to Gaza, was attacked on October 7 when more than 100 Hamas terrorists entered our community and basically went on a crazy killing spree. They killed 15 people in our kibbutz, murdered. 7 people from our community were kidnapped into Gaza, 5 women and girls and 2 men. So far, the 5 women and girls have been released after dozens of days in the hands of Hamas, but 2 men from our community, 2 friends, 2 fathers, 2 neighbors, 2 husbands are still in the hands of Hamas in Gaza more than 70 days now. As I said, out of a community of just over 450 people, we lost 15 on that tragic, terrible day. Impossible to comprehend, impossible to understand. And yet, when we look around us at neighboring communities, some of them were hit even harder. Kibbutz Kfar Aza lost more than 50 people, and Kibbutz Be'eri, more than 100. These are larger communities. They have more people to begin with than Nahal Oz. But still, this did not spare anyone. And the terrorists also attacked the nearby cities of Sderot and Ofakim, and they also killed dozens of people over there. So October 7, the terrorists attacked our community. We were stranded inside our homes, inside what we call the safe rooms for very, very long hours. Basically, in every home in these communities on the Gaza border, there is a room that is built of very strong concrete that is supposed to withstand direct hits by rockets and mortars. And most people spent the entire day, very, very long hours inside those rooms. It's like a small bedroom, basically. Yeah. There was no electricity. Yeah, I want to join Stephanie's request for everyone to mute themselves.
No, maybe we go to the drugstore first, and we can also get a cord.
Or maybe if the organizers can mute everyone and then unmute me, that may also be a solution.
Just regular.
Because otherwise, we're going to keep hearing people's shopping plans.
USB.
Which I understand it's Sunday, but So anyway, what I was starting.
Dan Bender, unmute, mute.
Mute, everybody mute.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, I was starting to say, we spent very, very long hours in our safe rooms in the dark. There was no electricity. There was no food. The military arrived in the afternoon, evening hours to get us out, but we only left the community at night. The first bus left Nahal Oz around 10 p.m. The second bus that I was on left around 11 p.m. and a third one left after midnight. And those buses took the entire community. Okay, those buses took the entire community to nearby kibbutz. To a nearby military base that was not attacked on October 7th. And from that military base, we arrived very, very, very early in the morning of October 8th to Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek. Mishmar HaEmek is a kibbutz outside Haifa. It's very far from the Gaza border. It's relatively far from the Lebanese border, kind of, really in the heart of Israel. And when the community of Nahal Oz arrived to Mishmar HaEmek on the morning of October 8th, every family received a small room.
Stop and Shop.
Dan Bender, please. Dan
man.
Bender,
Yeah.
please mute.
They'll have Band-Aids and they'll have mints.
Okay, guys, maybe it's possible to mute everyone. Then we'll also be able to mute.
I don't, is somebody from Bethel the host? I guess.
Dan
Other-
Bender is the
yeah.
Dan Bender is the host, and he needs to mute himself.
Okay, this is like one of those questions about can
I'm
God create a
sorry.
stone that he
I'm
cannot
sorry, Amir.
lift?
Yeah, I just sent an email to Bethel. I'm not sure who in the office
Is that-
is the host here today. It's
yeah.
not the Skolnick
I
Institute.
mean, it's all one.
Sorry about that. Dan Bender.
I don't think it's a separate entrance.
Oh,
Okay.
Dan is the host. Somebody
They-
needs to
they-
call him on his
they-
cell phone.
I know.
Yes.
Space on the other side.
This is so unfortunate. We're all so sorry.
yeah.
No,
Deb-
it's okay. I'm sure we'll solve it in a minute. I just it's a bit difficult, but I'll try to continue meanwhile until somebody gets a hold of Dan and tells him to mute himself. Anyway, what I was starting to say is, when our community arrived at this kibbutz near Haifa, Mishmar HaEmek, on the morning of October 8th, every family received a small room. When I say small, I mean really small. I mean, it's like smaller than a hotel room, with, a few mattresses on the floor. Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, they made everything ready and available for us. Each family received clean sheets, blankets, towels, shampoos, because we couldn't take anything from our homes. You have to understand, we had a very short notice. I mean, after very long hours of waiting and waiting and waiting, suddenly the military said, okay, there's a bus, get ready. And each family could take maybe one bag with stuff. And that's all we had, basically. So they prepared everything for us. Clothes, I mean, even what I'm wearing right now, actually, it's not my clothes. Everything they prepared for us. And since October 8th, our community, most of it has been hosted in the same place, in Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek. On October 10, I think it was, 3 days after the disaster, they opened a kindergarten for our children. I mean, just think about what this required from a community that, just like us, woke up on October 7 expecting a normal Saturday. They began watching the news. They realized that disaster was happening in southern Israel. Our two communities have a connection that has been going on for years. Every time there's some sort of a war or crisis on the Gaza border, Nahal Oz evacuates to Mishmar HaEmek. It's a long-standing friendship. And yet, this time what was requested of them was completely different, because we usually, when you have these security events on the Gaza border and our community would evacuate to Mishmar HaEmek, we would stay there for maybe a week. This time, Kibbutz Mishmar HaEmek, from day one, realized a different thing was happening. And they basically decided to make their home open to us for an entire year. They opened the kindergarten. They put our children in their school system. They're doing incredible things for us. And we are eternally grateful to them. And also to another small kibbutz in southern Israel, Kibbutz Kramim, closer to Be'er Sheva, which is also hosting several families from Nahal Oz, people that wanted to stay closer to the south because of their workplaces. And we've been living like this now for more than 70 days. I don't like the word, but it's true. We are refugees in our own country. We lost our homes on October 7. We haven't been able to go back ever since. We only had one chance for each family since October 7, to go back to Nahal Oz during the ceasefire that held until about 3 weeks ago. If you remember, there was a 10-day, not even 10-day, a 7-day ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, during which more than 100 of our hostages were released, and we handed over to Hamas hundreds of their prisoners. So during that window of 1 week of a ceasefire, we were able to go back to our homes and bring things from home and see the damages that were caused to our homes and understand, what is even happening. And I did go back home and I did see that in my house, we saw that more than 30 bullets were fired directly at our home, through the windows, through the door, on the walls. And I did see that my two cars, my wife's car and my car, have been completely destroyed. Not easy. But yeah, this is the reality we've been living with since October 7th, the reality of being refugees in our own country. Now, I have to say, we are not alone in this reality. Today in Israel, there are approximately 150,000 people, 150,000, who are living in these conditions. 150,000 people, evacuees from southern Israel, in different degrees of closeness to the Gaza border, and evacuees from northern Israel in different degrees of proximity to the Lebanese border, where also there are now daily events of rocket fire and drones that, suicide drones that are hitting targets. Just yesterday, a soldier was killed in the northern border by one of those drones that Hezbollah operates. And today, Kibbutz in the north was hit directly by a rocket from Lebanon that pretty much destroyed their local culture center. So it's a very, very difficult reality. Now, for us, the refugees from the south, from the Gaza border, I can say that there is one source of comfort, which is that we see the military operating in Gaza. And we see that Hamas is getting hit, and that many of the infrastructures of Hamas are being dismantled, and many Hamas fighters are dying. And we get a sense of hope that maybe at some point we will be able to go back home, that we will be in a place where it is safe to go back home. For the evacuees from northern Israel, and we meet them because they've also been evacuated to the same area that we are now staying in, for them there is very little hope, because right now there is fighting along the northern border, but there isn't a full-scale military operation to push Hezbollah away from the border like there is with Hamas. And so they are completely helpless in a way. They have no idea when they will be able to go back home. They are waiting for something to happen, maybe some kind of international initiative to remove Hezbollah north into Lebanon, away from the border. Very hard to say. I believe that both for us, the evacuees from the Gaza border, and for them, the evacuees from the Lebanese border, it will be many, many long months before we are able to go back home. And during these months, we will continue to live in challenging conditions, to say the least. I mean, to be, an entire family with children in one room for 70-something days is not easy. I want to add, though, that our approach, regarding how we want to talk about this and describe this reality is a bit conflicted. We are not the only ones who are experiencing a difficult time right now. There are, tens of thousands of Israelis who have been recruited to reserve service and are now fighting in the north and in the south and in other places. And obviously for them and their families, it is just as difficult. And we have, of course, people from our own community who are now in reserve duty. My next door neighbor got out of the nightmare of October 7th, and 2 days later was enlisted in the military and has been in the northern border ever since. My own brother, he's an officer, a military doctor in a combat unit, and he's been on the southern border for many, many, many days now. So this is all around us, and we are also aware of the difficulties and the hardships of the soldiers and the reservists and their families. We know that so many families are going through the worst days of their lives right now because they lost a loved one in this tragedy. I mean, so many citizens were murdered, so many soldiers have died, wounded. You know, I went twice in the last 2 weeks to the Sheba hospital outside Tel Aviv, to the department where soldiers from Gaza are being treated, the injured soldiers. I have a friend who's there, and I'm going to write an article about a battle in which he was injured. Amazing story. And when you go there, you see the price of the war. And I want to tell you, it's a very, very high price that we are paying in this war. So many young men are injured. And you see one guy in a wheelchair, and one guy without an eye, and one guy without an arm, and one guy without a foot. And it's tough to see. And now I believe this is a justified war that we have to fight because of what Hamas did on October 7, and because we want to make sure nobody ever does anything like this again to the people of Israel. But, you know, realizing and accepting that it's a justified war, I also want to say the price is very, very difficult, especially when you see it with your own eyes. And I've seen it, you know, from several circles. First of all, what happened to my own community on October 7, when 15 of my neighbors were killed or murdered, including my neighbor who lives, you know, across the street from me, basically, who was the security coordinator of our community, Ilan Fiorentino. He was one of the first people who were killed on October 7 because he was the first one to confront the terrorists who entered my kibbutz. And I've also been in touch with families of soldiers who died protecting our community, soldiers from many different places in Israel, died that day, protecting, you know, Nahal Oz and other communities in the area. And I've also been in touch with families of soldiers who came to Nahal Oz on October 7 and helped fight the terrorists and release us and emerged alive from Nahal Oz. And sadly, they later died in the fighting inside Gaza. So I've also been in touch with their families. Like I said, the injured. I mean, it's really endless. And Israel is also paying an economic price for this war, because first of all, obviously 70-something days of fighting will have an impact on any market in the world, and the impact on Israel has been severe. And in addition, we are going to have to invest a lot of money in the coming years in rebuilding the communities along the Gaza border. We're going to have to enlarge our defense budget, which is already stifling the economy in many ways. I mean, so much money in Israel goes to defense needs, and it's money that could have been used otherwise for education and welfare and, you know, growth drivers. And then we have, you know, the rehabilitation of the wounded and the psychological help that so many people will need. It's endless. It's a very, very difficult time. When I look at the future of my own community, the optimists, and I consider myself one of them, the optimists believe that we will go back home to start the school year in Nahal Oz around October 1st. Because right now our children have already entered kindergartens and schools in the area in which we are now staying as internal refugees. And we don't want to remove them from this environment until they finally feel a bit of stable ground under their feet. I mean, think about the experience of these children, okay? They woke up one morning, there was gunfire outside their window. Now, I'm talking now literally about my two girls, okay? I have a 3.5-year-old and a 2-year-old. At the time of the event, she wasn't even 2, she was younger. You know, they woke up one morning with gunfire literally outside their window, and their parents told them that they're not allowed to leave the room because it's dangerous outside. And there was no food and no light for 11 hours, and all the time there was gunfire and shouting outside. Eventually, they got out, and then but still they couldn't leave the house, and had to hear all these weird sounds because the fighting continued into the evening hours, and there were mortars and rockets. And then very late at night, a bus came and took them away from their home to a new place that they've never been to before, where they suddenly didn't have their own room anymore, but they were sleeping in the same room with their parents on mattresses on the floor, and they had to start a new kindergarten in a new environment. And they have not been back to their home ever since for 70-something days. So the most important thing in the world right now for these children, like my two daughters, is some sense of stability, some sense of, stable ground under their feet. So we don't want to take them away from where we are right now, at least until the end of the school year. Even putting aside all the security questions, what will the military campaign achieve? What will be the reality on the ground in Gaza and on the border area? Will there be a diplomatic initiatives after the war to keep things stable and under control? Will the military stay on the border? There's a lot of security-oriented questions, but I'm not even touching on those. I'm just talking about my children right now. So I think the optimistic scenario is that we finish the school year in Mishmar HaEmek, and then in the summer, we go back to Nahal Oz, and we start the school year over there, the next school year on September 1st. That's the optimistic view, and I adhere to it, and I want to believe we will be able to achieve it. There are three problems that, will stand in our way. Problem number one, of course, is Hamas. We don't know how Hamas will emerge from this war. I don't buy the big statements about eliminating Hamas, eradicating Hamas. Hamas is not just an organization. It's not just a terror organization. Hamas is an ideological movement that has hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of supporters in the Palestinian population and in the Arab countries around. In order to eradicate a movement like Hamas, you need years of fighting, and not just fighting. You need also diplomatic action, economic action, educational action. You need to use a lot of tools in a lot of smart, sophisticated ways, some of them completely military, like what we're doing right now, going in there and killing their people and destroying their tunnels and destroying their mortar launchers. Yes, you have to do that. But we saw the campaign against ISIS that was led by the United States and involved many other countries. That was not purely a military campaign. And we even remember that defeating Nazi Germany, which of course was 100 times stronger than these organizations, but even defeating Nazi Germany required a diplomatic strategy and an economic strategy and a legal strategy, judicial. It was not only military. And so when we talk about Hamas, I think Hamas is going to remain a force in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for the years to come, even after this war. And we will have to think how to deal with that. Problem number two is the Israeli government. The current government of Netanyahu, I call them the October 7 government. They are the government responsible for this disaster. They failed in the most terrible way that a government can fail. They failed to protect their own citizens. On October 7, more than 1,000 Israelis were slaughtered in their homes. People were kidnapped into Gaza. More than 200 Israelis were kidnapped into Gaza in one day. That's something that has never, ever happened in the history of this country. Women were raped and people were tortured and children were killed. This is a failure that words cannot explain. And it came 10 months into the tenure of this current government. If it happened 3 months after they took power, maybe they could have said, we didn't have enough time to prepare. It's all on the predecessors, on the previous government. 10 months is a lot of time for a government to take office and start taking responsibility for its actions. And what did they do during those 10 months? They used those 10 months to push through an incredibly unpopular plan to dismantle the Israeli judicial system instead of focusing on a plan to dismantle Hamas and Hezbollah. And they tore apart Israeli society with this judicial plan that led to unprecedented protests in the streets of the country. The military warned them several times. Okay, the heads of the military warned the government that this tension around the judicial plan will be used by the enemies of Israel, who are sensing weakness in Israeli society. A day before the most important vote on the judicial plan, which took place on July 24, a day before that, the chief of staff of the military asked Prime Minister Netanyahu for an urgent meeting to show him what was coming up in the intelligence, to show him how the enemies of Israel were interpreting the social tensions in the country. Netanyahu refused to meet with him and only met him after the vote had already taken place. This government, we don't trust them. We don't think they see our interests before their eyes. We don't think they care about us and our children. And it will be very difficult for us to put faith in them if they tell us 5 months or 6 months or whatever from today that it's safe to go back home. We don't trust them to take care of us and to protect us. And that's a major problem. The third problem is the military. The failure of the government is immense and will never be forgiven and will never be forgotten. But the military also did not function on October 7. And the military intelligence also failed to give a more concrete and direct estimate about when Hamas will do this attack. Everybody was caught by surprise. I can tell you, as someone who lived for years on the Gaza border, we had complete faith in the Israeli military. We all believed that we were taking some risks by living there. For example, we chose to live in a place that does not approach because it's too close to Gaza. And that, unlike most Israelis, so someone is waving their hand. Is there a sound problem? You're not hearing me or something?
You were breaking up briefly, but it's back.
Yeah, hiccup for a bit. Now
Oh,
you're
it's back. Well, thank you for letting me know. So what I was trying to say is, on that order, we always know that we were taking risks that other Israelis do not have to take. We chose to live in a place where
No sound now, no sound.
It looks like you lost connection. Let's just wait a minute, okay?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I had a technical issue, so I moved to a different computer. I hope it will work now. So what I
We
was
can
talking.
hear you now.
Great, great. Thank you so much, and sorry for the breakup. So what I was starting to say is, the military also, obviously, it was a huge disappointment is a small word to say what we felt. What we felt with the conduct of the military. Now, here I do want to say something that's a little more nuanced. The military failed completely on October 7th. I mean, it is completely unreasonable that in our community, the military only arrived around 2 p.m. after the terrorists were already killing people at 7 in the morning. And there were other communities where it was even worse, where the military took them even more time. I have, however, no criticism at all for the soldiers, because many, many brave soldiers arrived on that day and did their very best to come and save people under impossible conditions. And there are many stories of heroism of young officers and soldiers, and also older, veteran officers, and also citizens who came to fight and save people. And there's, specifically the story of my parents, my family, that some of you maybe have heard that my parents drove down from Tel Aviv, and my father joined. My father is over 60, and he joined the fighting. So, there are many, many stories like that. And I have made a big effort since October 7th to go and say thank you to the family of every soldier who was there that day and did not come back, who died in the fighting, and soldiers who were wounded. I met one of them this morning, actually, a guy who was wounded, fighting to open the road to our kibbutz against the Hamas terrorists, and my parents evacuated him after he was injured. And so, I'm really grateful to those soldiers. But it must be said that while many brave soldiers did everything they could to save lives, the military as an organization failed completely, and was not ready for the attack. There were not enough forces in the Gaza border area to withstand this onslaught of 3,000 Hamas terrorists that broke into the communities and into the nearby military bases. And we need to see how we regain the trust of the military. I think my differentiation between the military and the government is that with the military, the question is, how can we, trust them again? With the government, there's not even a question. We cannot trust them again. And that is a major, major problem that we're going to have to deal with. The last thing I want to say has to do with our friends in the Jewish diaspora, with many of you who are watching now. First of all, I know that the past 70 days have also been very difficult for you. I don't compare your experience to ours, it's very different, but I've also been following what you are going through right now with this intense outburst of anti-Semitism that we're seeing in the streets of American cities and college campuses, with all the lies and the deceptions and the fabrications that you are witnessing and you're trying to deal with and explain to people why it's so wrong and what is actually the reality on the ground. And sometimes also physical violence. We saw in Los Angeles where a man was murdered, killed. I'm not sure how the police there is calling it, during a demonstration in support of Israel. And we saw this incident in Detroit that is still being investigated, as far as I understand, and many, many other incidents. And I want to say that we support you from here. We really support you in this challenging time. We understand what you and your children and your grandchildren are dealing with. We understand it's not easy. And I want you to know that we're thinking of you. Specifically, in my community, Kibbutz Nahal Oz. And I want to say that the American Jewish community has been there for us big time. Okay, since October 7th, or actually I would say since October 8th, when we've been in Mishmar HaEmek, in this kibbutz outside Haifa, we have had, I think, 7 or maybe 8 delegations from the American Jewish community come and visit us. Rabbis, community leaders, students, And I have 2 more Jewish American delegations coming to visit us in the coming days. I want to contrast that and let you know that right now, I see Deborah wrote that Detroit was not an anti-Semitic. Okay, so I was misinformed about that, but there were other incidents that I was referring to. But I want to contrast this support that we've been getting from the American Jewish community with the fact that for these 70 plus days, not a single minister of the Netanyahu government had come to visit our community. Not a single one of the ministers who was in office on October 7 has had the courage to come and visit us and look us in the eye. Okay? A community that lost 15 people, that had 7 people kidnapped, 2 of them are still in the hands of the enemy, where everybody is now a refugee without a home. No government minister has come to visit us, yet we are seeing every week friends and supporters from the American Jewish community coming to support us. And there are other expressions of support. Washington Hebrew congregation. Washington Hebrew congregation raised more than $100,000 for the rehabilitation of the Nahal Oz community. And many other communities have really come forward to support us. And I believe this is an important moment in the relationship between Israel and the American Jewish community. I know we have a problem there as well with the government, that, you know, this is the people in power now are the same people who disregarded the American Jewish community and said, oh, we don't need them. We have the evangelicals, who backed away from an agreement that was signed regarding the egalitarian prayer space in the Western Wall, and said all kinds of insulting things about reform and conservative Jews. We know that's a real problem. And I want you to know that we, in my community, we think the world of the American Jewish community. We know that this community has been there for us in so many different ways. And I think one of the things we have to do when we restart Israel after this war is over, we're going to have to restart the country. And we have to treat the relationship with our brothers and sisters in the diaspora much, much differently, and pay much more attention to what is important to them, and find a way to show our appreciation to the people who were there for us during this time of crisis. And I saw that Deborah sent in the chat the link for donations to Nahal Oz. We are basically, I'll tell you a bit what we're doing, and then I'll open it up to some questions. We are now raising money solely for the purpose of rehabilitating and rebuilding the community. This is donations that, first of all, they don't go for any kind of organization or headquarters or offices or salaries. Nothing of that sort. It goes directly to Kibbutz Nahal Oz for the purpose of rebuilding. We have a committee that was set up in the kibbutz by the community that is responsible for the rehabilitation, physical needs, roads that need to be repaired, homes that need to be repaired. You know, we have a kindergarten that needs to be strengthened in terms of, you know, how security is for the children. And then there are also future needs that we want to expand and do things in a way that will attract new families to the community. And we want to grow and become stronger from this event. So that's what we're raising. That's what we're raising for. And I want to ask you, if you are able to go and make a donation, please write that this was based, you know, that you saw it through the Zoom with Amir Tibon from Bethel, because we are also trying to learn how are the most efficient ways for us to raise, what works and what doesn't work. And so when you go there and if you send a donation and if you write that you were on this Zoom call today, first of all, it's a huge help to our community. And second of all, it's helpful for our fundraising team to understand what kind of events work and don't work. So really, thank you so much for hosting me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to also present what we're doing right now. And hopefully people will be able to help us in this process. So I'm going to take some questions now. I see people have sent them in the chat. I will try to reply. There's a question here about the number of deaths by friendly fire inside Gaza. Basically, soldiers who were killed by, unfortunately, fire from other Israeli soldiers. We're talking right now, according to the military's estimates, around 20% of the soldiers who died in Gaza died in friendly fire. It's a relatively high number for any kind of war. Some people believe this is actually a low conservative estimate and that it could be closer to a third. And what I want to say about that is that we are dealing here with a very, very difficult war inside an urban, dense area in which the enemy is fighting a guerrilla war using the urban environment for its own advantages, hiding behind civilian institutions like schools and clinics and hospitals. And in this kind of environment, it's very, very difficult to fight. And unfortunately, accidents and mistakes happen. And I think the soldiers in there are under a lot of stress and are facing a lot of danger. And at the same time, I will say that we have to investigate these incidents one by one, including the incident that happened on Friday, in which 3 of our hostages were shot to death by a military force that didn't fully understand what was happening. They were walking in the street with a white flag, and one of the soldiers began firing at them. And we have to investigate this. We cannot just say, oh, it's a difficult war, it's a difficult situation, and just let it go, because if we don't investigate, then we will never improve. But it's also important to understand this really the difficulty and the severity of the situation. And I know it's a bit of a fine line, but that's the reality, okay? We have to understand that it's first and foremost an indication of how difficult the environment is. And at the same time, we have to investigate it, and we have to learn from it, and we have to improve from it. There's a question here about the ceasefire and the question of, stopping the war. What should we say to those who say there should be a ceasefire? Listen, I cannot tell any other country in the world how to understand its own interests, okay? I know that President Biden has supported Israel now for more than 70 days. At the same time, that other countries have begun to call for a ceasefire. We saw France calling for a ceasefire. We saw the UK, Germany. I consider all of these friendly countries. These are friendly countries that support Israel, that we have close diplomatic and economic and security and intelligence ties with. And I understand where they're coming from. Okay, they have their own interests in the region. I think many countries are worried about what's happening now with the issue of international shipping. That, since the war started, the Houthis in Yemen have been putting all these constraints on international shipping through the Bab el-Mandab area. And this is causing a lot of concern in Europe about, the economic implications. I understand all of these countries have their own diplomacy in the Arab and Muslim world, and they've been taking a hit in that regard. They've been criticized for their support of Israel. And some of these countries, there are also maybe political considerations. If the war is unpopular among segments of the population, that will make a difference. All I can say is I'm grateful to President Biden. Okay, I'm not going to attack the Brits and the French and the Germans for calling for a ceasefire. I can do it, but it's first of all, it's not going to make a difference. And second of all, Israel, we have our own interests, and that's what should guide us. I also understand other countries have their interests as well. But I do want to applaud President Biden, because President Biden has been the most important supporter of Israel throughout this war. He's been with us since day one. He sent military forces to the area to deter our enemies from attacking us. He became the first ever American president to land in Israel during an ongoing war. Okay, land in a bombarded Tel Aviv. No American president has ever done that. And again, we see that he still supports us. Now, it's true. His support is not unconditional. There is no such thing as unconditional support except between a parent and a child, and even that has its limits sometimes. But it's not unconditional. He's also asking us to do some things differently in how we conduct the war, in how we allow humanitarian assistance to come into Gaza. And frankly, it's not in our interest to have a humanitarian crisis there. We don't want plagues and diseases to spread in the Gaza population. First of all, because it will be a disaster. Second of all, because we have more than 100 hostages there. And if, God forbid, there is an outbreak of dysentery or some other disease in Gaza, our people will be impacted. And maybe also our soldiers who are in very close proximity in some of these places. So I understand what President Biden is asking for, and I think we should be grateful for his continuing support of Israel, and we should also understand the limitations that he is facing as the leader of the United States, a country that has vast international interests, including the war in Ukraine and the competition with Russia and China, and the local competition in the Middle East with Iran over influence in the Arab and Muslim world. And his political standing, all of these things also matter. And for him to stay with us like this for more than 70 days is very significant. Has there been any official reason given for how long it took the military to respond to the attacks? To say one reason is impossible. There were many explanations for this. There were not enough forces on the Gaza border on the morning of October 7. It was a holiday. A lot of soldiers were at home. In the days and weeks preceding the attack, some forces from the area were moved to the area of the West Bank where there were terror attacks at the time, and it was seen as a higher priority to have more forces over there, including just 2 days before October 7, the military moved about 120 combat soldiers from the commando forces to the West Bank because they thought it was a hotter, more dangerous area at the time than the Gaza border area. I think on top of that, there was, of course, an intelligence failure that, there was no indication of what was happening. And also, I think even after the attack started, a lot of people in the military and in the government did not fully understand the severity of the situation. They thought, oh, maybe, a few Hamas cells infiltrated the border and the forces that are on the border will contact them and kill them. I think it took the military too many hours to realize the breadth of this attack, that 3,000 terrorists had washed over these communities and military bases, and by then it was too late. There's a question here about the two-state solution, if it's still viable or not, what's the end game? It's a really tough question. First of all, it's a legitimate question if the two-state solution was even viable on October 6, not just on October 7. I think the two-state solution has been in a very, very low priority for everyone in the region for many years now. It's not been a priority for the United States, not for Israel, and also not for the Palestinian leadership of today. We're all living in the status quo, and with a sense that, the status quo was sustainable. And I think that some of the things that we were told before October 7 turned out not to be true. For example, we were told that Israel could just make peace with the countries of the Gulf, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and we don't need the Palestinians to, they're irrelevant. Okay, I think Prime Minister Netanyahu gave an interview on Bloomberg 2 weeks before the October 7 attack, and he was talking about the, negotiations with Saudi Arabia, and he said the Palestinian issue, it's not really important. You just have to check a box. It's something you have to just check the box and say you did it. I think that's obviously not true. The Palestinian issue after October 7, we know, is the biggest threat to Israel. Okay, the biggest threat we are facing still, the biggest challenge to our ability to maintain a Jewish democratic country here. and also an important issue in the region. Look at what is happening all over the region right now since this Israel-Hamas war began. Okay, look what's happening in Yemen with the interruptions of international shipping. Look at the demonstrations that we saw in Jordan and the concerns about the stability of the kingdom. Look what the leaders of Egypt and Saudi Arabia are saying about this. This is a serious issue. And of course, Lebanon and, you know, attacks on American forces in Iraq and Syria by the Iranian militias. So I don't think we can ignore the Palestinian issue. Having said that, can we tomorrow morning or a year from today create a Palestinian state in the occupied territories, Judea and Samaria, West Bank, however you want to call it, and connect it to Gaza? No, of course not. Okay, this is also not a realistic option after what happened on October 7. We obviously understand that there will be huge risks associated with that. And I think what we really need here is something that is very lacking right now in the Israeli political system: long-term planning. We need to tell ourselves, okay, we cannot ignore the Palestinian issue, and we cannot solve it in half a year or 2 years from today. And now we have to think about a long-term strategy and a long-term vision of how we want to see our life in this country and what we want to do with these millions of Palestinians who are still going to be here when this war is over, in Gaza and in Jerusalem and in Ramallah and in Bethlehem. And we understand that we cannot ignore them anymore. This idea of, you know, just going directly to the Saudis and ignoring the Palestinians failed. But the alternative of pushing, you know, all these years there was the movement in Israel, peace now, shalom achshav. There is not going to be peace now. But we have to think about what we do in the long run. What is the long-term strategy here? How do we deal with this? And we may decide that we are building a plan for 10 or 15 years ahead that will eventually lead to some kind of self-rule, self-governance for the Palestinians. You can call it a state, you can call it less than a state. The words and the definitions, I think, are not the important thing here. The important thing is what is our strategy, what is the goal. Right now, we don't have any kind of conversation about that here in Israel. We've been living through an ongoing political crisis for the last 5 years with a prime minister who is himself a criminal defendant, who dragged this country into 5 election rounds in 4 years. When you have 5 elections in 4 years, you don't have time to plan ahead. You don't have time to think about the future. You don't have time to make long-term strategies like any normal country, and especially a country like Israel needs to do. And I think this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Not if something is viable for tomorrow, but where do we want to be 10 or 15 years from today? I'll take one more question, and I'm really sorry. I see a lot of people are asking, but there's a quick question here about the money that went through Qatar to Hamas. This was basically a strategy for many years to try to buy quiet, to bring suitcases full of dollars into Gaza and to trust Hamas then to, as long as the money comes in, not to attack Israel. Obviously, it failed completely. And I think some of that Qatari money was used for the attack on us. Friends, I'll end it here. I'll send again in the chat one more time the link that Deborah sent earlier for the donations. And again, if you have a chance to give something to Nahal Oz, we will be grateful. And I want to say how happy I am that we had the opportunity to speak today, and how proud I am of this ongoing relationship with the Bethel community and with the Skolnick Institute. And I really, really hope that I will be able to continue next semester as we planned this time, and meet all of you again. So really, toda rabba for listening today, and we'll be in touch.